everybody, it's Valerie Greenwell and welcome to Quilt Artistry. Today I'm going to be working with a very large Amazon Star quilt. And honestly, this quilt is probably too big for me to quilt on my machine, but I'm going to try to quilt it anyway. So the quilt measures 120 by 120 inches square, and I have the 12-foot frame. So I want to take a minute to show you how I have everything loaded on my leaders, and then how I'm going to set the computer up to accommodate this large quilt. So give me a minute to get everything set up and get the camera turned around, and then I'll be back and I'll show you what we've got. Okay, so I'm back at my machine here, and I want to show you the things that I'm really trying to take into consideration as I set this quilt up. First of all, you can see I have my my backing loaded, and there's not a whole lot of room here. Where the needle is should indicate approximately where the corner of my quilt will be, right here at that pin. So you can see I don't have a lot of room to fuss. I've got about 2 inches on the top and then 2 inches on each side. Taking a look at the back of the machine, when we're working with something that's pretty much as large as we can work with on this machine, okay? One of the things that you need to take into consideration is how far to the right you can stitch. Now, on the right side of your table, for me, let me get this out of the way, this nut right here takes up a little over a ½ inch of space. On this quilt, it really makes a big difference. So what I've done is I have moved my handlebar right over to the edge of that, and now I know, looking down here, this is as far as I can go without worrying whether or not those handlebars are going to hit the bar. Let's bring this all the way down to the other side, and we're going to check the other side as well. So here, my tightest spot that I have is where my handlebars hit my monitor. So you can see I have my monitor swung all the way out as far as it can go. I am going to have to stitch the majority of this quilt with the monitor swung all the way over to the left as far as it will go. Now, knowing exactly where my margins are, I know that I cannot stitch any further than this right here. You can see here in the back, my handlebars are touching the edge. And so, again, this leaves me with about a 2-inch margin, give or take. I have my fabric loaded. Normally, I use red snappers, but because my margins are so tight, I have taken off my red snappers, and I have everything pinned into place. You want everything to be absolutely as smooth and as straight as possible, because in this quilt, for me, there is no margin for error. Okay, so here is the Amazon Star, and it is 120 inches by 120 inches square. So let me get the quilt laid out on top of the frame, and we'll take a look at the measurements and the margins. Okay, so I have my quilt top spread out on my backing. I do not have my batting on here yet. I am checking all of this for size. And as you can see, like I said, my margins are very tight. So I'm going to have a couple inches on the sides, a couple inches at the top, and coming down here, I'm going to have a couple inches on this side. So I have my machine bumped up to the edge of the frame, so I know that this is, I'm going to have plenty of room to stitch on this side. I've got maybe, I'm going to say about 1.5 inches to 2 inches here. So now I want to pull the machine down to the other side and check and see how much space I have on this side. I'm guessing I'm going to have to move my quilt to the left a little bit. So again, my spot that I have to work with is is this nut right there. So that tells me I know I can't get any further over than that. And here I'm only about a ½ inch of space. And I would like to even out the available space between the left and the right. So I would shift my quilt to the left a little bit more. That way I've got at least an inch on either side. So knowing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pin, and I am going to put a pin here that tells me when I get my quilt top loaded that I want this corner of the top to be about right here on this pin. That will move it over a little over ½ an inch. That should give me an equal amount of space on both the right and left sides of the frame. Okay, so I am going to show you how I load my batting on the frame with these ever so tight margins. Okay, so I have my batting loaded. I am very, very close to the top of where I have my pins. There's just a little tiny bit sticking up above the top of the pins, and I have it right to the edge of the fabric on the right hand side. Actually, here's my excess. I'm trimming it off as I go so that I can make sure I have the bottom layer of fabric is visible. I want to be able to see that at all times. Okay, so I have my edge to edge set up on screen here, and I'm just shooting this with my cell phone to the screen, so I'm sorry if it looks a little wavy. Anyway, so I have this set up on the screen, and I have 4 repeats. This is a concatenating pattern, and it alternates from one to the other, but also you can see that it stitches off the edges of the edge of the quilt here. What I chose to do was to create the boundary that we see, where's my house? The boundary that we see here, hang on. The boundary that we see here is about 1 inch larger than the entire quilt. So if you were looking at the quilt, that's about where I created my boundaries. And I made sure to extend the size of the quilt in the length so that I would have an equal amount of space down below. Now, the reason why I did this is because I really want to stitch an edge to edge on this, and I do not want to have a bazillion tie-offs going all the way around. So I want to fill, but I want that fill to fill off the edge of the quilt top so that I don't have the backtracking from the fill on top of the quilt. So now that I have the edge to edge all set up, what I'm going to do is go in and I'm going to trim each pattern, or not trim, I'm sorry, I'm going to use a fill inside, and I'm going to do this one pattern at a time. Okay, fill inside, and again, I'm just going to do that all the way down until the end. There's only 4 repeats in this row. It's a very large pattern. It's stitching about 30 some odd inches wide. Now, with all of that filled, I can see now this trim is going to be right off the edge of the quilt. If I move my needle in there, that is where the edge of the quilt actually is, right here. So I know all of that is going to stitch right off the edge, and I think it's going to be perfect for this. That's what I'm going with, and each subsequent row, of course, I will come in and I will fill the first pattern and the last pattern. And then likewise, I will do the bottom exactly the same way as I did the top when I was filling that. So I'm going to get the stitching. I'll hack after the first row and tell you how it went. Okay, so I have finished stitching the first row, and I have to say it behaved exactly as I thought it would. I was able to stitch off the edge of the quilt a little bit, and still be able to keep it on my narrow backing fabric. And you can see, of course, here where it did the fill inside, and this made it a lot nicer for me because then you don't have all of those tie-offs from, like, as opposed to using trim. So this is Lone Star Fill by Sweet Dreams Quilt Studio. I think it was a perfect edge to edge to use on this quilt. I'm excited to see how this looks when I get it finished on the whole thing. Anyway, I'm going to get this rolled and get going with the second row. So as I roll this quilt, I want to be mindful that my quilt does not migrate towards the outside edge at all, because there's just no margin for this. There's not enough room for the head of the machine to get any further to either side than, say, right about there. Again, as you can see up here, I only have about an inch to the outside of this, and that is really the edge of the quilt. So as I progress down this quilt, I am just trying to be very mindful of my margins and continuing to move down the quilt. Okay, so I am finally on the last row of this quilt, and I have quilted everything using edge to edge. But at the bottom row, because I want to do a fill inside, I'm going to need to convert my edge to edge over to repeat patterns so that I can delete the original boundary, this right here, so that I can delete this boundary so that I can create the boundary that I want to fill inside of. So when I get ready to roll on this last row, I'm going to put it on the last sewn point. I like to use a pin to mark that last stitch because when I'm using these one of the feet that has the smaller hole in it, such as the spoon foot, the red light from the laser light will kind of reflect on that pin head, and it makes it easier for me to see. So what I'm going to do here is move the head of the machine to the last stitch, of course, like I said, marked by the pin head. And then instead of doing roll quilt, what I'm going to do, let me get over here. Instead of using roll quilt, I am going to use relocate. So what I'm going to do is select this pattern here. I'm going to do a right click, and I'm going to come down to where it says relocate, shift all to one point. And it's going to ask me, am I sure I want to do this? And I'm going to click yes. And because I know this is my last point sewn, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to click on that point. And I know that the machine head is there, so I'm going to say yes. Now it has relocated this last row. Now what I can do is delete this boundary. Okay, I'm going to delete that boundary, and I'm going to create a new boundary. Okay, so I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to select Draw Boundary. Now, what I'm going to do is very much like I did on the very top of the quilt, okay? I'm going to create my boundary within an inch or so of the edge of the quilt so that I can have enough room for the pattern to stitch off the edge, but still stay within my stitchable area on this quilt. This doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't really matter where it is. We're going to cut all this off anyway. And you want to make sure you get as high up as possible when you're drawing this, because you don't want it to cut too closely to this and like cut off the top of your pattern. Okay, now that I have everything relocated, now I'm ready to fill inside this new border that I created. Now, because all of the connections are down here, what I want to do, instead of doing a fill inside with each individual pattern, I'm going to grab all of these patterns as a whole, and I'm going to do a right click, and I'm going to select fill inside. That's going to allow all of those patterns to remain connected. Okay, so now I can see that it is ready to sew. And from here on out, there really shouldn't be anything special. This is it. So I just wanted to come back and show you what this looks like as it stitches out. For those of you guys who have not tried this before, if I am stitching with an edge to edge that really comes down, has to come way off the edge of the quilt, you know, maybe because it is a nested pattern, I like to use this same technique because you can get it to cut the pattern off without having to stitch all of that excess down beyond the quilt. So you can see this makes it a whole lot cleaner, and where it has the backtracking and whatnot, such as here, all of these additional lines are going to be stitched off the edge of the quilt. So when I get ready to go trim the quilt, you're not going to have to worry about having all of that excess on the edge where your binding is going to go. So personally, I think it's a much cleaner look. And for this quilt especially, it has allowed me to be able to stitch an edge to edge on a quilt that was really too big for my frame. Or maybe I shouldn't say it's too big. It's exactly the size that I can stitch, and there's not any extra room. So anyway, so that's it. I just wanted to share that part with you. And again, I'm going to finish letting it stitch, and then when I get it all off the frame, we'll take a look at everything. Okay, so that is it. I was able to successfully quilt 120 inches on a 12-foot frame. I really didn't have any problems at all. So I'm going to call this one a success. Meanwhile, I hope you all enjoyed my videos. If you have any questions about how I did any of this, feel free to message me. Have a great day.